of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Okay, welcome to the show, everyone. Welcome to Pod Damn America, week of February 2018 something. I can't remember. Sorry the show's a little late this week. Your boy's been busy. I've been sick and applying for jobs and all sorts of crazy shit. Shut up. Don't at me. The show's 2 days late. I'll kill you. Okay. No, sorry. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry about our tardiness. But as you know, as you may or may not know, we've been creating episodes and bonus episodes. As for this week, though, I feel like we've got a really good guest, and he's got some really interesting stuff to say, and he's a good friend of mine. So what we're going to do is bang out an episode here, and this episode's going to be all free. So if you like what you hear and you find it interesting, and you feel like listening to more, get on our Patreon page, patreon.com/PodDamnAmerica, subscribe, and we've already got a backlog of some really cool bonus episodes that you can listen to if you feel like supporting the show. A couple weeks ago, we covered the new Antifa episode of Law & Order. That was real fun. We're talking about maybe just doing a Marxist viewing of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Stuff like that. That sounds fun, right? That's great. Thing you can subscribe to and support our dumb comedic journalistic endeavors. Anyway, welcome to Pod Damn America, the leftist podcast for idiots. My name is Jake Flores. I've got with me, as always,
Andersley here.
And
Ragameta.
What's
up?
Guest in the house tonight, in the podcast basement, is a wonderful friend of mine I haven't seen in a long time. Joshua, how are you?
Hi, my last name is Androsky.
Josh Androsky.
You know that because you clicked on it.
You're not rebranding?
No, I'm not going just by Joshua now. they call him Joshua. I also like the endearing like Joshua, like Jake just used, because we are old friends who've known each other for years.
I was fucking with you a little bit.
Well, I'm a fan of like the endearing Joshua, but one of my personal pet peeves is somebody who has a name like Joshua or Benjamin who doesn't let people call them the nickname. Who's like, actually it's Benjamin, or like, actually it's Joshua. I just find that like they're
very biblical and like, I don't like it.
To me, it's like you are Vox. Like if you do that, like you are an explainer of a person.
Yeah, my name's Topher. It's not Christopher or Fur. I don't know what the other end of that is.
But Topher is also like a part of that because you wouldn't. It's like you're Chris. No, your name is not Topher. Your name is fucking Chris.
Yeah.
Because we all decided that your name is Chris.
Yeah.
Although this sounds like a pronoun debate, I'm totally cool with whatever your pronoun is. Your name, however, like that's bougie.
Yeah, God decided that.
Yeah, damn right. If your parents sucked, live with it.
I've tried to be Andy many times, and it just comes out as Anders. Like I can't, my brain won't reprogram. Have you thought about being Raj?
Oh, people have insisted on it, but no, I've never gone with it. No.
Not Rog.
Rog was a thing.
I feel like that's more
people call me
confusing
Gav
than.
now.
Well, that's a cool one.
Yeah, they go at the end. Yeah, which
Okay.
I like. It goes well.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ake?
No, I'm a Jacob, which I don't know. It sounds really gross. And also, I watched Lost, and now I feel like a vengeful god if I'm a Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob doesn't work for you.
I don't like it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's way too proper.
Well,
I also
the
don't-
hair is kind of biblical.
I also
Right.
don't like Jake because it's like the name of like a 10-year-old white boy in a Go-Gurt commercial sort of name.
Definitely a suburban boy that chooses cowboy boots.
Yeah. But I'm like fucked. Like I was given two biblical names by
What's the middle name?
Matthew, which is like I'm from a Mexican family, and they're just like you pull the same 5 names from this fucking book, right?
What's this book?
It's called Dianetics. My middle name is Xenu, which you would think would be really cool, but got made fun of in high school for it. Yeah.
That's how zines were made. It's based on Xenu.
Yeah.
But I like it. It sucks because being half Mexican and then having that split, it pushed me farther. I was almost named Carlos. I might be a different person if I was named that and then grew up where I did. But it pushed me into white culture and whiteness and identifying just as a little wedge.
I thought Bernie did that.
Yeah, no.
Bernie made you white, bitch.
Yeah, no, my cult of personality god, Bernie. You know, me, I love old Jewish men. But I had a friend at a bar I worked at who I have this a lot because I'm a pasty guy and I like very American and it's white passing all this shit. But I told her, my dad's Mexican and all this stuff. She started calling me hacky every time I came into work.
What?
And I was like, you don't understand. I'm a comedian. That's an insult.
What did she think it?
Because she's saying hake.
Oh,
she's
okay.
Saying Jake with the fucking fun,
Wait, was she white?
No. She was from some other crazy South American country.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So she was doing it as an endearment.
Yeah.
But it was also a comedy club. So I was like, you can't yell hacky at me when I walk in the door.
Hey, bombs a lot. Come on.
Your next performer is Hacky.
Yeah. Hey, prop comic. No, my name is Prop Comico. Okay.
El Road Dog.
Hey, Clapter, come here.
Yeah. Anyway, those are our names, and this is the goddamn show. Welcome. We're going to do a little bit of news items from the week. It has been a minute since we've last been in here, and it's really weird doing a weekly show, which you would think would be enough, but it's like every day that's just
too much
tons
news.
of shit coming down the mountain. So I feel like it's almost old news to talk about like this shooting, and it's also
boring.
You would think distasteful for a comedy show, but
we're gonna try it anyway.
It's just so many shootings. It's like
there's gonna be another one.
It's like tragedy plus like quantity or something. I mean, it's like no one gives a fuck anymore. The country doesn't give a shit. Those teenagers don't give a shit. They're doing weird Pokemon jokes about it, yelling at Marco Rubio. They don't give a fuck. I have a couple things off the top of the dome I wanted to say about it before we get into everything. But I was reading a lot of stuff about like the shooting, and something that always comes up that's kind of interesting to me that I feel like no one's really that consistent on is the mental health aspect of this whole argument, because unfortunately, because of the NRA and everything, we have this unfortunate situation where the concept of mental health as relating to mass shootings, I think, has been so co-opted by the right and the guns rights lobby that it's getting thrown out with the bathwater, because now we have like a reaction to that on the liberal side, which is saying like, this isn't about mental health at all. This is about access to guns, and like you're using this as a red herring. And it kind of bothers me as someone who years and years and years ago at some point in my life was on a track to a career in mental health. Like I feel like this is kind of pinging part of my brain a little bit to go like, I think maybe I might have something to say about this that isn't entirely
What do you mean
apparent.
a career in mental health?
So I was
like
a
a social worker?
I was like majoring
Gonna work for
in
the NRA.
psychology.
He's gonna get committed to an insane asylum.
Just gonna be in a straitjacket.
Yeah.
A career in
I
mental
model.
health.
I was a life coach, and I should be armed.
Open a Roth IRA. Do it.
No. When I was in school, when I was going to UT, I was studying psychology. I was looking at social work, and I was studying a lot of like neuropsychology and stuff like that. And that by no means gives me, any authority on everything. But if there's anything you learn through going to college and then hanging out with journalists and shit like that, it's like, what is the concept of authority? Like, all I have here is an argument to make. But the thing about the mental health that I think is really interesting is that, like, I think the way this issue is getting split real hard, it reminds me of a quote, a Stokely Carmichael quote, where he's like, he says, if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. If you have the ability to lynch me, that's my problem. And that kind of parses out the concept of access to being able to damage other people versus the desire to do it in the first place. Those are two different things, right?
Right.
And it's a good point, and it relates to the gun argument really well, because the main issue is people that are crazy having access to these guns, right? That is absolutely the first thing we need to do to fix this problem. But I don't think that we should throw out the concept of like, why are these people this fucked up and atomized at all to begin with, which seems to be part of the sort of liberal agenda.
Right. Well, I think like the notion of how to stop mass shootings is to be like, okay, well, we have to stop these like high volume, assault style weapons, whatever the fuck you want to call them, AR-15s, like guns that can kill 30 people relatively easily. And now those aren't the guns that kill the most people. Most people are killed by handguns because most people that die from guns aren't killed in mass shootings. And so I think what the right is trying to do is muddy the water by adding the mental health thing.
Right.
When the clear answer to stopping mass shootings is stopping the production and sale of these weapons that are capable of mass shootings.
Yeah.
Which are all like overwhelmingly these like semi-automatic rifles.
I guess what I'm saying is that like it sucks when things get put into a dichotomy, because if you bring up mental health, that like if I bring that up, that you shouldn't assume that I'm against everything you just said, because I'm totally for restriction of these, and I'm not a fucking nutso like gun guy either. Like there are leftist people that are like into guns and shit. I'm not. I'm like totally we should lock up all the AR, like should just not have these or whatever.
Sure,
but the reason I came to like back around to this argument, I've been thinking about it a lot, is because the big answer in a lot of like internet, like Twittery, like leftist arguments about this is, it's not about mental health. It's about, men and like toxic masculinity and things like that. And like cishet white and all this like identity stuff. And that shit's, it'd
be so funny if you just went full on woke right now.
And that's 100% correct. And that's the only thing we need to focus on.
Yeah.
No, but for real though, like I think there's a middle like kind of line there, which is that stuff is real, but what you're describing is mental health. And the reason people don't think about it that way is because with mental health services in the history of like psychology as a study and like a soft science in America, like the study of the brain is split into psychology and psychiatry, and psychiatry is specifically pharmaceuticals, like treating it medically, right? And psychology is all this like Freudian behavioral stuff, like how do we address what's going on in your life? And that's, you're talking about toxic masculinity and stuff like that, you're talking about that. So you kind of are defeating your own point. You should be on board with the idea that is part of this equation. I mean, you're talking it out as if it is. If you don't believe that what you're talking about is a mental health issue, I kind of have a feeling that some of these people are just like, yeah, the problem is like, toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
we should kill that. Like, round them up and fucking,
Well, a lot of it is a reluctance to acknowledge that toxic masculinity actually sucks for men too. Like,
I don't like it.
It's not as bad as being a white dude. Being a white dude sucks. It's not as bad as being someone else.
Well, yeah, everything sucks under capitalism.
Right.
Sure, but I think the main issue with this, at least the way that I'm seeing it, is that these are all different scopes of solution to the problem, right? So, like, the very granular, like, material answer is remove the guns. Remove the guns. And then you pull it back, right? And you're like, okay, and then there should also be background checks, which address mental health, which address people that have been deemed by the state to be mentally unfit, right? And that's like a mental health issue that has like a tangible way that you use this mental health issue to control gun ownership, right? And then you pull it back even more, and it's like, okay, and what is the underlying thing of all of this? It is very overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white males that do mass shootings. So at the same time, we should address that, but that's much more of an abstract thing. Like that requires, like what you were saying, which is like therapy, a sort of a way to address that would be to end the CDC ban on researching gun violence as an epidemic, which there is a ban on researching it.
Oh, hell yeah.
And so like that would get to the bigger issue. So there, to me, all this stuff, to get through the noise, it's like, okay, so what is the tangible thing that's done by having this take? What is your answer? What is the tangible thing? And I think those are the three things. They're not separate. They can all be done at the same time.
That's my point, is like that parsing things out in a certain way between, left and right partisanly, it eliminates certain things. Like it what you just described, you're just describing this holistic approach to this thing. We need to understand all of these things in order to fix the problem. Well, that's exactly what's being undone by going, no, it's not mental health at all.
And it's also worth pointing out that these conservatives who are pointing to mental health as the cause don't want to fund mental health services.
Oh, that's
Absolutely.
the most hilarious
but
shit.
But that's why people are upset about the mental health answer is exactly what you just said, which is it's being used in bad faith by the right.
Okay, so my little soapbox here for the episode is like, don't throw that baby out with the bathwater, because there are a lot of takes being thrown around about this Nicholas CRUZ guy. And a lot of them are, this is just a byproduct of privilege and yada, yada, yada. And that's like that's a lens you can look at this through. And there's some extent to which that is true. But I kind of want to point something out. We have a trend of like, don't even research and don't glorify the shooter.
The people echoing. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, my point about this guy is that I looked into him a little bit, and
he's pretty cool.
So he's got pogs. The reason I looked into him is because I was like, his last name's CRUZ. Like everyone's doing this white shooter shit, and I'm going, are they doing the thing where you're Hispanic and it's like you're white if they don't want you to be?
Ted Cruz's dad was involved with the Kennedy thing.
Yeah,
so maybe
his Zodiac killer.
Yeah,
there's a long CRUZ family tradition.
Right. So I had this hot take ready. I was like, wait a minute.
Forget gun control. We need cruise control.
Yeah.
Oh my god. So I kind of thought, am I going to figure out that this guy's like Hispanic and no one's going to talk about him? I'm going to have this huge hot take, right? But I looked into it. It's weirder than that. His last name's CRUZ because he was adopted. He's like an orphan. And he was adopted by Hispanic parents who then also died, right? And then he was like living in some family's couch going to high school and like night school at the same time or some shit. Don't like hold me to a lot. This is like a loosely formed fucking thing or whatever. But he, but was a fucked up kid, and like the foster parents that he had when this happened, freaked out, and they fucking, his foster mom was like at the jail when they dragged him into jail and like lunged at him, and the dad had to hold her back like they were in a bar fight and shit, and like there's some extent to which, if you look at this guy's social media and stuff, I think under different circumstances, we would probably look at this if it wasn't politicized in this way and go, this is a fucking weirdo person who's got all of these things we're talking about.
It's going to make a great American Crime Story season is what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great Lifetime movie.
It's going to make a great emo album.
Did he kill his parents?
No.
Well, his parents died.
Yeah, why do all these people... Yeah, I'm on the same thing. Let's do a serial about this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, unless he was a little Damien like Voldemort kid and he killed his parents when he was a baby, maybe he did.
Well, then he's cool as hell.
Yeah,
yeah, the good son, dude.
Yeah, right.
For real.
Well, he was a big Trump. He was a big MAGA dude, right?
Was he? I'm not.
That's
sure.
what
I saw. There were pictures of him.
He had the hat,
doing target practice in the hat and boxers.
Yeah.
But it's like also, who knows what his real fucking worldview is?
Right.
Well,
he's a psychopath.
Yeah,
well, but
his Instagram was him posing with guns and like weird fucking throwing knives.
But
and
being
shit.
part of the social like welfare state, like of like group homes, foster homes, that bureaucratic nightmare of being raised by that in Florida. Obviously, there's something to that. As like, I mean, you're not gonna like fucking like empathize with the fucking dude, but like you look, I agree with your underlying point of like, let's take everything into consideration when we looked at this so that we can have a holistic approach to the like resolution, which is no more mass shootings.
Yeah, so I guess I'm like looking at this very holistically and going like, well, let's not get carried away because we have a tendency to get carried away and shoot ourselves in the foot. That's a bad way to put that around. Maybe my foot should be armed. What do you think about that?
Arm your foot.
A lot of the rhetoric around shooting feet is kind of problematic.
Arm, feet, whatever, dude. Two genders, arms and feet.
I do kind of worry, though, and other smarter people have made this point, that a lot of the gun control legislation being proposed that people have kind of written about could lead to a even more drastic increase of the carceral state. So the way we treat drugs, small amounts of drugs, when we go into poor communities and lock people up, is that the same thing's going to happen with guns.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you see brought up in leftist circles a lot, which is that, like, yeah, and it's true. If we do implement gun control in the society that we already have, in the framework we already have, all that's going to mean is that it's going to be enforced on young black men and then, like, not really enforced on white people and whatever.
Right. I mean, that's why you need to target institutionally. You need to target gun makers and manufacturers and sellers more than you target gun buyers. You want to stop the proliferation of guns. You don't want to build another way to create slave labor like they did in the drug war. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And also another thing as far as gun control, like things to look out for, is that fucking the like not letting people with guns that are on the no-fly list, like not letting people on the no-fly list buy guns, which was like a weird thing that the Democrats really went to bat for. Like for
let's trust the no-fly list.
Let's trust the executive branch's like purely racially motivated like hate list.
Yeah, that's also the thing with like felons too, because this amorphous idea of felons is like criminals or whatever, but like who are 90% of these people? You know, just
right. That's why I mean, and it's a simple thing of like overall. I think what it is don't have a take unless there's an application to your take.
Well, and it's also a classic like Clintonian, like, aha, you believe this thing but not this thing, and we're going to take this conservative idea and like push it as a campaign.
And to harken back to Josh's point he made earlier about like the way we talk about gun violence and we only frame it around mass shootings, and every time there's a mass shooting it's like, oh, this is when we talk about gun control. There's a ProPublica article that came out a few years ago. It's like 4 years old now, but they're quoting someone in here. I can't remember who, but it's like the most obscene incidents of gun violence usually do not make mainstream news at all. Citing a nightclub shooting in Tennessee in which 18 people were shot and only one person killed. We believe the media does a disservice to mass shooting victims by virtually ignoring them unless large numbers are killed. And a lot of those people who are shot in, shootouts that involve 2-3 people are black men, disproportionately.
It's just like being a comedian. If you can't get the big numbers.
No one wants to hear from you.
Imagine being in a mass shooting and then just kind of being like, I thought that I was going to get a big break as like a crisis actor from this, and then nobody.
By the way, you're LA guy. Crisis Actors Union, is that hard to get into?
Look, it's the Crisis Actors Union's pretty tight. All you have to do, you get a voucher if you're seen crying in the background on CNN.
Okay.
But like the problem with being a crisis actor is like once you get too good at it and you're too memorable, they burn you. You're not allowed to do it anymore. So.
You also can't take non-union gigs.
Right. So definitely no like crisis acting on True TV or
and all those crisis child actors
Fusion or whatever.
So fucked up.
They're
so fucked up.
Well, I
not like the midlife crisis actors.
And phony.
I personally am a crisis triple threat. A crisis act, a crisis dance, a crisis sing.
You should see him crisis sing.
It's great. I was doing the national anthem at the Boston Marathon when it blew up. And that was part of it. It was really dramatic.
It was just a black and white cold shot. Oh, say
no, I did Fergie's. I did the horny one.
Oh, you did the bad rock band take?
No, dude, did you watch that?
Yeah, no. I'm saying it sounded like she was playing Guitar Hero badly or whatever. The one where you can sing.
No, it was just a stand-up bass, baby.
Yeah.
She does. Man, every few years she'll do something like this just to get her star right. Remember when the vaginal sweat?
Oh, Fergie's playing 4D chess.
She is. Fergie. That's the name of this episode. Fergie's playing 4D chess. I decided it.
No,
I don't even know if that's how you name episodes, but that's the name of this.
It was like 10 years ago.
It's a podcast. It was that's how we name everything.
It's Black Eyed Peas related.
The Black Eyed Podcast.
Yeah. No, she was like at the Grammys or something, and everyone was like, "Did Fergie piss her pants?" Like, and she was like, "No, that was vaginal sweat."
That's worse.
Yeah,
that
like why did you
that's so
much worse thing.
That's so weird that she would say that. Just be like, "Look, these award shows are insane. You don't get any time to go to the bathroom." Multiple
Really?
times?
Yeah.
It happens a lot.
Have you ever seen the
That's awesome if it's true.
singing Guns N' Roses on the
Well, come say it to a mic.
stage?
Hang on.
Okay.
Rachel Millman, come
Rachel
to
Millman in the
It's
house.
quick. There's great footage, if you haven't seen it, of Fergie on, I think it's the Good Morning America stage, doing runs while doing one-hand front flips.
Yes.
To Guns N' Roses.
But that rules.
It's fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And
I respect her as a performer because of that.
I agree with it's probably lukewarm by the time this, it hits sort of like
You know what else
iTunes
is
or whatever.
lukewarm? Fergie's pants.
I agree with the take that Fergie's anthem is what this country deserves right now. It was good. It fucking rocked. I watched
It
it
was
like
super sexy.
I watched
It
it
felt
like
It was
appropriate.
5
absurd.
times.
It did not rock. It was absurd.
Like
That's
the
why it rocked.
country.
Okay, it rocked because it was crazy.
Yeah,
Deal.
exactly. And
Absolutely.
I thought it was just like it was hysterical. I watched it like 5 times, and the unsettling drum throughout it, just like not being even, was wonderful. Anyway, I'm gonna log off as the Fergie pants pissing expert. Bye.
Thank you for your expertise.
Every podcast needs one.
Yeah.
Well, suicide. I've been,
I love it.
suicide is not.
Wait, hold on. It could have gone one of 2 ways, right? It could have gone back to the gun debate, suicide, or we could have talked about the Will.I.am hologram. And I'm happy that we're going back to the gun debate specifically about suicide.
Why not both?
Re-enter.
Arm him.
I'll see what I.
Arm the Will.I.am hologram from 2008.
The hologram commits suicide at the press correspondence dinner or something. Suicide is part of those statistics where they talk about gun deaths,
Yeah.
Right.
which people don't point out.
Right.
Well-
And here's my hot take on gun ownership. Buying a gun makes you a whole gun's worth more likely to die from a gun.
Yeah.
Like buy an entire gun.
Yeah, for sure.
That's an entire gun more that you're likely to
that
be
just
killed
being
by a
around
gun.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the thing that people don't talk about suicides, and that goes more into the most gun violence, which I believe is like handgun violence, not mass shooter violence.
Well, statistics can just be really misleading. Like they're
Well, if they're not contextualized at all, which
Yeah.
they usually aren't. But
they're
yeah.
real wonky. It doesn't mean that these mass shootings things are not a problem in the very specific way that it's very obvious that they're a problem.
Right.
You know, gun stuff. Like I don't know. I hesitate to even get into it because we only got a certain amount of time here. But it's really interesting because it's such a cultural thing, and I'm from the fucking South, and there's like this argument's been going on in America for so long that like I don't think we're gonna fix it by yelling at people through a podcast right now because there are people that are very much decided to like
have
one
to
way
shoot
or the other.
them.
Yeah.
Shoot them into not having the gun.
That's how they would have it, I
Yeah.
think. You know.
So like the last one was in October, and then we just had one. So we're like due for another Me Too story, and then like a dumb Trump tweet, and that will happen like 3 times.
Do you ever play
consecutively.
Majora's Mask on
Yeah.
Nintendo 64? I feel like Trump's presidency is like
I haven't
this-
played it, so how so?
It's this video game where the entire game takes place in one day and the same thing happens over and over again, and then you you have to perfect the day to where every
Were they
time
gonna
the
make
same shit
Groundhog
happens.
Day into a video
That's
game? They're like,
basically-
this is too boring.
that's-
We need
that's
a
what the game-
magical aspect.
No,
to it.
that's that
Okay.
game or whatever, and that's what this fucking feels like. Because it's just the same 3 news stories like over. It's like
Yeah.
Me Too and a fucking gun thing, and
Yeah, and then it's
What's
like, is this
Russia?
kangaroo sexy?
Let's combine
The
them.
answer is yes.
Hell yeah.
Gloria Allred
let's
mass
talk
shooting.
to Fergie about it. Yeah.
But then the other thing is like Russia, right? Which is like,
so good.
There's this.
They did the mass shooting.
Yeah.
Nicholas is
Bernie
spelled
and Russian
Nikolas. Nicholas is spelled like the Russian way.
I mean, you say that as a joke, but like someone out there firmly believes.
Yeah, his
that
name's
there's
Eric
something
Garland.
fucking going on.
Well, there was this tweet by Terrell Starr, who I like peripherally knew about. I don't really know much about him, but so he tweeted that story broke last week. He's like, it's a CNN story that he's quoting of like a Trump supporter yelling about Hillary on her lawn, and his tweet says, "This woman called Hillary Clinton a bandit. I'm sure she picked that up from a Russian speaker, as most Americans don't commonly use that term to describe criminals. It's commonly used in Russian-speaking countries, however."
What?
You know who
Yeah.
retweeted that? our girl, Joanne Reed.
Jar Jar.
Friend of the show.
Yeah.
Joanne Reed.
Wait,
Bandit is
First
also...
of all, bandit is an English word. It's translated.
Has he not heard of the sticky bandits?
commonly
Smokey
used
and the Bandit
to describe raccoons.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Joanne Reed is so interesting to me because I do not follow her, and she's all up in my feed.
Yeah.
She seems
People
to
I
be this
respect
beacon
a lot
for everyone.
Retweet and favorite her stuff all the time, and it drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it drives me absolutely crazy. It's the truest form of like, if you follow and retweet Joanne Reed, you are the type of person who never, like before the Trump election, never thought about politics.
Yeah. Same with David Frum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You are just the person who just does exactly what you're told.
You know what it is? Her show on MSNBC, AM Joy. That is the name of her show. You're like an MSNBC viewer. You wake up at fucking 6 in the morning, whenever that shit's on.
It's just on.
It's on, and it's everything you need to reaffirm your existence as like a liberal by like turning this on super early in the morning. It's too early to like really have that nuanced of a view on anything. You see a black woman
DJ
saying,
AM.
R.I.P. Joanne Reed, dude. R.I.P. DJ AM. Well, no, she's not DJ AM, but she is best friends with Travis Barker.
But you're right, though. I mean, like, I honestly, like, you know, I've been a millennial for a long time and have not had cable and shit, and have been like, you have the internet and stuff. And every time I go like back to like my parents' house or something and watch like TV, I turn on like CNN or something and see like this Joanne Reed shit and go, oh my god, it's so obvious. This is just Fox News all over again, just sort of like bent through the liberal perspective or whatever.
That's the thing that like the Chapo dudes have been talking about. That is 100% correct, and everybody should be talking about it more. Is like the way that we made fun of teacots and like those like conservative, just like the conservatives that went absolutely nuts when Obama was elected. So many Democratic Party partisans, like loyalists to the DNC, are reacting the exact same way. And this Russia thing, like, is almost like their Benghazi or their birther thing.
The thing that this always makes me think about is that you know, when you were a kid and you were like myself, if you can relate to this, you know, I grew up during like George W. Bush and stuff, and was like, you know, way against this guy George W. Bush. And you know, these older people, and I grew up in Texas, and so like a lot of these older people were conservative. They say, yeah, he sucks, but what you don't understand is when you're young, you're going to be a liberal, and you grow up, you're going to be a conservative. Right. And what it always seemed like they were describing was a gradual, like, sinking to that side. And so I always thought, well, that'll never happen because, like, I can tell when I'm moving to one side or whatever. And through this Trump stuff, I've started to realize, like, it's not a gradual thing at all. It's one big push every few years, and it's shit like Trump that causes these situations to happen where people have to go, oh, I'm either on this side or that side or whatever. So, like, when Trump happened, I knew a bunch of people who lived kind of in, you know, ignorance, like a lot of us did, myself included, you know, and I'm like, have no problem admitting that because I'm trying to get smarter constantly through life or whatever. Right. But, you know, I have a lot of friends who, like, I think that they don't realize being a neoliberal now is the equivalent of having drifted to the right, like, whatever, 10 years ago or whatever. Yeah. It's just, that's how it happens. It happens in a way that makes you feel like it's not this huge fucking thing, you know? Those people won't become Republicans because that's the wall that they've put up or whatever.
But the Overton window has shifted to the right.
Yeah.
And what bugs me about it is it's constantly cloaked in like this like pseudo pragmatism where it's like, oh, well, all those things sound great, but getting healthcare is hard.
Yeah.
Well, it's people that hate politics that are now confronted with politics all the time. So they're super susceptible to the sort of Reagan style, Clinton style of like, we don't need more government. We don't need more. And that's like the United States of care kind of shit.
Such a big idea in the South, man. Like the thing that everyone in
hate
Texas,
politics.
where I'm from,
United States of care.
Yeah, the one of the biggest myths down there that I've only really wrapped my head around, really from getting out of like Texas, is like even people that consider themselves left and liberal down there and stuff, and liberal's probably the fucking word, is like these people all cling to this idea of like, well, you know, I like all this social stuff about liberalism, but big government's a bad thing and small government's a good thing. Even people who consider themselves to be on the blue sides of things still stick to this.
And that's a problem of branding from the Democratic Party. I talk about this all the time. It's the difference between Obama's earned income tax credits and fucking Social Security. Social Security was pitched by fucking FDR as literally the posters that were up were a hand coming out of the White House with a fucking check in it. And it was like...
And then a hand going into the White House.
Yeah, baby.
With its fingers all clasped up like that. I'm sorry, I'm doing a fisting hand for anyone listening.
So it's just a hand coming out of the White House with a check in it, and it just said, a check for you every month. And it was such an easy to digest, this thing is helping me. Whereas... Obamacare or the earned income tax credit, like, it wasn't until after, like, I realized that Obamacare was saving me a bunch of money, but I didn't know it was because all that I knew was like, oh, weird, my tax return is a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit more tax return money than I was before. That's weird. I wonder why. And then I did some looking into it and saw it was because of Obamacare.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Barack Obama is making you pay less money in taxes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because wonks and technocrats are like, well, people technically will spend the money less and they'll be more smart about their money if we do it in this way so they don't know that they're even getting it. And that sounds good, but it's horrible politics.
So I think if I heard this correctly on your podcast, my assessment of that was that the reason that happened is because, like, Clinton, Bush, and Obama era Democrats had to code the language in such a way that they could sort of sell that idea while also selling it to conservatives at the same time.
Because they're trying to constantly triangulate and get Republican suburban voters.
Right, which is such a dumb strategy now that we know, like, people would just vote for, like, a Bernie or whatever.
Right, well, everybody would. I mean, the problem is they don't want the vast majority of Americans who don't vote to vote, and they would vote with simple programs like this.
Right,
but when you say big government, you should counter by saying, I don't want big government. I want big government services. The government's big. We're not going to do anything to it. What I want is them to be. I want a huge amount of relief from them. That's and like the idea of picking Medicare, Social Security, programs that people like, and going like, these are government services. Like, not saying, oh, no big government, we got to slash jobs, or we got to get rid of welfare or something like that.
Yeah.
You just change the branding on it to make it more appealing, because that's all it is.
Right.
It just sounds better to say we hate big government.
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about those old people in, like, Texas who are saying, like, you're left wing now, but you'll see, like, when that happened to me, I became more conservative, and that did happen to them, but because of their specific historical, like, life, Reagan. Before Reagan, like, big government, like, that wasn't really used in the same, like, that terminology wasn't used as much, and he started targeting big government as this thing, and there was no one else, like, really giving a convincing alternative.
It was a meme from the 80s.
Yeah, it's a meme from the 80s, and now, like, maybe we're going to say something way different to kids, 50 years from now.
We're going to say, I used to think like you until I saw a condescending Wonka. Well, you'll see. But anyway, in terms of all these big ideas about government, Joshua, how would you say this relates to the concept of banks? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I want to make the government bigger, dude. I want to nationalize the banks.
Yeah, you want to inflate the government with a big Super Mario plunger,
just like Iceland did, right?
I'm not sure about Iceland nationalizing. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to, like, send tanks into Wells Fargo, because even though that's what I believe, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should drag every banker out of their bed and shoot them in front of their only children.
The next mass shooting should not happen.
Well, that's the other thing. When you were like you don't want to make the carceral state any bigger, or did you say that? Yeah. When you were like, we should make the carceral state bigger, I was like, except for executives. then I want to jail those guys.
Yeah.
So I'm working a lot right now in LA on the public banking movement, which essentially boils down to where your public funds, where your city's public funds reside.
Yeah.
So the idea of like the question that I want people to start asking is like, what happens to the money once it goes in the bank? Because I think as a country, the majority of us just think of like, okay, you deposit in the bank, it just sits in the vault, and like there's just this big vault, and Scrooge McDuck.
It's
fucking
literally
swings around.
this $20 bill from 1992 that is
Right.
in a bank account with my name on it.
Right. And so what actually happens is that money then funds the bank's gambling, and it funds the bank's gambling in horrible, risky, subprime mortgage derivative swaps, that crash the economy. But also they invest it in fucking Philip Morris and Raytheon and in private prisons. Just the worst places in the world is where Wells Fargo is investing the money that's yours. It's in your account, but it's not just sitting there. It's moving constantly, always going in and out of people's pockets. And then when you pull it out, that's the only time that it's physical money.
So the bank loves to gamble.
Essentially, that's all a bank does.
Does the bank ever play that game where you put your hand on a bar and hit a knife around it a bunch of times?
Yeah, constantly, and it goes faster and faster every time. And every once in a while, it'll cut a finger off.
Oh, that fucking
It's like
rules.
it hard, yeah.
Once it cut the whole hand off,
Is it its own hand or is it like
It's your hand.
Yeah.
it's our hands.
Yeah.
It's all of our hands. So what we want to do is we're working towards municipal public banking. So I don't want you to think of your money as in like your bank account. Think about it as in your tax dollars or the money you pay for utilities, your gas or electric bill. When you pay in Los Angeles and many cities in America, you pay your electric bill. The city of Los Angeles has that earmarked and budgeted to go to some service, ideally turning your power on. And that money then they deposit into Wells Fargo, and then Wells Fargo does all that shit I just explained earlier with that money. Instead of it being in your city, improving your city. So we want to take Wells Fargo out of the position to control where that money goes.
Sure.
When we want to put that in the hands of the municipality itself. So, for example, like, and this helps in zillions of ways. This helps, like, literally every issue. This touches every single issue. So your electric bill money is sitting in Wells Fargo, and if it was sitting in a public bank, then what would happen is it would be used to fund low-income housing, which banking, like traditional private banks, don't touch because it's not a high-yield investment. You're not going to but you're going to get way more money from making a luxury condo than you would a public housing or supportive housing.
And that problem is sort of inherent in the concept of privatized banks.
Exactly,
right?
Because a privatized bank's incentive, its bottom line is to create profit for its shareholders. Right? And so a public bank would have a charter that is decided on by the municipality government, which is way easier to organize around, like street level than state level for like a big place like California or New York. And that's another reason why we like the city version as opposed to the state version for the first incremental step, is that you can get the city to be like, okay, and this is like what we're doing in LA right now is a responsible investment ordinance. It's known as an RIO. And that would say, it's basically the constitution of that bank. You can't fucking put it in polluting in any companies that pollute. You can't put it in any private prisons. You can't put it in any luxury condos. And so it shows, where this money can actually be spent. And it can be spent doing a bunch of things, from building supportive housing to going into the schools. This is all money that is like earmarked for other things, but during that time before it's spent, it's funding everything around you.
Yeah.
And through series of loans and, bonds and shit like that. So what do you think that Wells Fargo, now that I've explained that Los Angeles's money is used by Wells Fargo to create all of their profit and empire, right? What do you think Wells Fargo pays Los Angeles for that privilege?
Nothing.
Exposure, if it's Los Angeles.
They charge $150 million a year in service fees, in transaction fees.
Jesus Christ.
So for simply holding the money in a private bank, the city of Los Angeles is spending $150 million a year.
Let me tell you, that's also what Wells Fargo charges me for holding my money. Guys.
Yeah, baby.
You guys have checking accounts? Oh, it's brutal.
Woof. And so there's
what are the overdraft fees like for LA?
$100 million.
It's not good. Dude.
No, but for real, yeah.
No, Garcetti throws
vampires.
huge parties, and he's still paying off people to make everybody forget that his dad lost the OJ case. But like, when we talk about like banks and their relationships to cities, it also extends like the biggest thing, right? So it's $150 million a year, but the city of Los Angeles in debt servicing, paying off interest on loans. So if the city gets a bond or a loan in order to build a bridge from Bank of America or Wells Fargo,
right,
and they set a 9% interest. It's usually somewhere between like 4 and 10% interest. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's money that you have to keep paying back. We all know that's like how you get fucked. That's how you get into debt. Is you can only make minimum payments. The interest builds and builds and builds. So when there's when there's infrastructure spending in Los Angeles, guess what percentage of all infrastructure spending goes directly to paying the bank? Goes directly into a banker's pocket.
80.
What'd you say?
80?
It is not 80%. It's 50%.
Okay.
Which is
still too high.
Half of every dollar spent in one of the biggest cities in America goes directly into a banker's pocket.
Wow.
When you're talking about every infrastructure project. So
why don't people just aspire to become that banker?
Well, most of them do.
Just all people try to become that one banker.
That one guy. I think that if you try too hard to do it, he finds you with a drone and he kills you.
Okay.
I think that's the only reason.
What if the banker had a huge pair of pants that we could all just jump inside?
No, dude. Huge pants people are bad. Jared Fogle.
No.
Yeah. See? So the bank would effectively loan the city to create these, to up the power grid, to, modernize the power grid, to do all this. And the thing that really gets me excited about this is that, like the efforts in Los Angeles, the people that I've been working with Divest LA and Public Bank LA and DSA LA.
I know we sort of just barreled into this, but
right.
Just to be clear, you are working on this through DSA LA.
With DSA LA, Public Bank LA, and we are what Public Bank LA's done in getting Los Angeles to divest from Wells Fargo is incredible. They and with work of DSA members as well, got the city of Los Angeles not only to divest $150 million from Wells Fargo, but also to disqualify Wells Fargo from holding any money, which is billions.
Yeah,
we're talking billions and billions of dollars. And this is so like. During the Occupy movement, there was that whole thing of like switch to a credit union, don't have a big bank thing. That's a drop in a bucket, even if like a million people left banks, they'd be fucking fine. But if every major city starts to fall, that's a way where we don't have to use fucking Congress, like gridlock, that kind of shit, in order to pass something that would materially improve every person's life.
Okay. So I want to cut you off there because I want to ask you something
just
thesis-wise altogether about this, because this is really interesting to me, because I did listen to the episode of your podcast, Left Coast, where you had a wonk about this sort of come on and talk
Dave
about
Jetty
it, and I
name.
listened to it twice because with things that are this economically abstract, and I don't think I'm speaking alone when I say this to people listening to this, like tend to get a little fuzzy and
your eyes glaze over
because these things are so huge. I think you kind of like, I think it's,
and it's meant to be that way.
If they do get,
that's how they exclude people.
Right.
If this should be confusing, because this is like the big like tectonic plate at the base of society that is the root of all of these social ills we're talking about.
Right.
So like this, I listened to it twice and it blew my mind and it was really interesting and stuff. So I think that, like, I guess what I'm getting at is that if you can fully get this stuff through your head and you're listening to this, you should listen to and read up on this, and you should listen to that episode of West Coast and stuff, and like really like sit down and take it in. Once you get it through, it's like reading a huge book where you go, oh my God, now that I've read it, I understand all this stuff or whatever. And the main thing I got from getting all of this, the concept of what role banks play at the center of society through my head is, I think that this type of reform is analogous to like Medicare for all, in a sense that like it's the type of stuff that if we get people educated about it and we get it to pass, it'll make what's obvious about socialism like obvious to everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because this is a type of thing, this is the issue that, and it's crazy because I think it's easier than Medicare for all to get through, which sounds so crazy. Because you're talking about like curb
it's like
stomping Wall
getting
Street,
like someone to listen to an entire like Sleep album, and you're really into Sleep, and they've never heard the band, and you're like, it takes like 6 hours. But if you get really high and you get it all through your head, you're changed for the rest of your life.
Well, a big reason why I'm saying I think it would be easier to pass than Medicare for all is because there's no conservative opposition to it, because it's such a relatively new American idea.
Well, North Dakota has a public bank,
has
right?
a state public bank which was made in like the teens, and it was one of, if not like the strongest bank when in recovery of the 2008 crash, because they were a publicly funded bank, which it inherently limits their risk. Because the big thing is, right, is it's like, okay, well, why do we want the government to be in charge of banks as opposed to what, the guys who currently are? Like, A, there's that. B, you can vote these guys out
exactly. It can be
who are fucking
by
up
you.
the bank. Like, you are the ultimate regulator. There's no way you can vote Jamie Dimon out of his seat, you know, or fucking, you know, Lloyd Blankfein out of his seat at fucking Goldman Sachs.
And it's such a fucking
Vote out the
no-brainer.
Coke.
Because what are two things like Americans hate more than their fucking bank and their insurance companies?
Right.
Yeah, and it's also like it's I think easier politically to pitch to people, but it's also like if you think of a lot of the regulations, that some very progressive regulations that are being proposed for the financial services industry, extremely complicated, and they might not work because there are all these like smoke and mirrors that these armies of lawyers are going to try to throw at them. And it's a lot simpler to just take the whole fucking thing and say, this is ours now, and we're going to run it democratically.
Exactly. And that's really what it is. It's democratizing your money. It's making your money, it's making the money that you are forced to pay work in your community.
Yeah, so I cannot recommend enough like looking into this concept of public banking and reading about it and stuff, and just sort of like educating yourself about like what the role of a bank historically has been and how it got to where it
slavery
is.
I mean, if you look at like the major banks, like in America, some obscene number of like major banks, I believe Bear Stearns specifically began in order to like use the slave trade.
And that's where I bank today. They have a change machine. You can put your change in it, and it sorts them into little slots.
Really?
No, I don't know what the fuck that is.
Okay. Bear Stearns was like a Wall Street bank.
Imagine a Coinstar at like a Bear Stearns. Like that's a huge
Jake's
fancy
been going to
bank.
a Bear Stearns bank, and it's just like some fucking guy who's coming.
It's just like a big hairy dude who's very
Welcome
serious.
to Bear Stearns, Jake.
Yeah. No, it's actually just a slave they use.
Wait, so how is Wells Fargo reacting to these initiatives?
I mean,
are they trying to kill you?
So Wells
is that why you came to New York? You're fleeing Wells Fargo?
Well, here's the thing, right? Like, Wells Fargo's reeling. There's nothing that can happen. They don't know. There's no real opposition. Because what is the opposition? The opposition is just, what, you want the government to be in charge? And the easy answer is, what, you want you guys in charge? At least we have some sort of transparency, you know, within this system. There's not any other opposition other than, hey, we want this. So they're, like, scrambling right now. They lost, like, billions of dollars, which again is a drop in the bucket if it's just LA. But I think the thing about this is you're seeing it. There's a big movement in the Bay Area. There's D.C., New York, all sorts of cities. That's why I'm personally, if you live in a state with a major city or multiple major cities, I'm for the municipal public banking because, and just to get really specific, but hopefully your eyes aren't glazing over, the idea for me is that in order to organize for something, in order to create something that's not going to be watered down, you want it to be as close to the street as possible. And you want activists to be able to have a say. And so in the state house, with all the lobbying that goes on in fucking Sacramento or wherever the capital of your state is, wouldn't it be easier to do it in your city or your county or your, if you are a smaller state like North Dakota, then that makes sense. But so our plan right now in Los Angeles and what we're trying to do is we are trying to create a state law that would allow for the creation of municipal public banks, because there's currently a California law that is correct that says that a bank shouldn't loan money to its own shareholders, which that's like a horrible conflict of interest, right? When the shareholders are the people of the state, then it gets a little tricky. So we just wanted to create a law that just says, with the exception of public banks, with the exception of a public fund, right, whatever, and then kick it back down so that we think that a state legislature would be able to be like, okay, we want you to be able to do what you want to do in this case, and thank God we're not the ones who have to write the fucking law about it, And so like that's sort of, if you are a little bit more advanced, there's the issue of the state bank versus the municipal bank. And I am very much a municipal bank fan at first. And then as you see it go, then you can lead up. But like the key to having a public bank is making sure that it doesn't pollute and that it doesn't fund private prisons. And it does, because the North Dakota State Bank is incredible, but it's largely funded with fossil fuels. And so we want to make sure that for these future banks, they're not tied to fossil fuels.
Is your goal for this to eventuate in one national bank?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have absolutely no idea. For right now, the goal is Federation of Municipal Public Banks in California that could lead to the creation of a state public bank.
And the North Dakota Bank, that's run on Steve Buscemi being pushed into a wood chipper?
Yes.
Okay.
No. It's the North Dakota Public Bank is all about just various briefcases thrown from cars.
That's a banking system that makes sense to me.
That Oliver Platt finds.
Okay, so it's about 10 o'clock. We should probably wrap up. Is there anything else you guys want to kind of hammer out before we get fucking off this mic?
Shout out to Larry Krasner.
Dude, Larry motherfucker.
Dude, I'm going to Philly tomorrow. I'm going to kiss you on the mouth if I find you.
Larry Bear.
Great guy.
Yeah. For anyone listening that's unaware, there's this guy, Larry Krasner, who ran for DA in Philly, fully Black Lives Matter backed, straight up just Serpico style, went in guns blazing and won.
Suing police departments.
He's
multiple times. I think he sued the Philly PD like a dozen times or some shit.
Yeah. I've actually heard theories from people who live in Philadelphia that he's probably going to get murdered, which, like, he's my hero. Like, we'll see what happens. But he just did away with like low level bails. If you get
cash bails,
cash bails,
so people who like for petty offenses don't get stuck in jail.
Yeah.
Right. Didn't he do another thing with like weed law?
Yeah, he's telling them to not enforce.
He's
like petty possession, minor possession.
Minor marijuana.
I think he's actually going as far as attempting to
and
overturn.
suing Big Pharma. Purdue.
Right.
Yeah, all in like 6 months.
Yeah. He fucking
this
rules.
Guy fucking owns.
He's doing like, I know it's on a more micro level, but he's doing what people thought Obama was going to do when he got elected.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, oh, he's going to just fucking do all this shit. And then like September came, he's like, Tim Geithner, Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And this, I mean, I have like a lot of anarchist friends, and I'm sympathetic to a lot of what they say. But something that we always go back to when it comes to like elections and politicians, which, again, I of course don't think elections are the be all end all. They're always like, oh, so you get one guy in power, like what is that gonna do? And it's like, well, this is what it does. It doesn't change the entire world, but there are a lot of people whose lives are better already.
Other people to run.
Yeah.
If you just look at just be a materialist. How does this materially affect the lives of the people around you?
Right.
If you can use electoral shit to do that, to materially improve the lives of people around you, don't shit on that. Mm-hmm. Like I understand that, like, yes, we're still imperialist, but God damn it, like, fuck, like, we're trying.
Oh, you guys, you got some candidates you're running over there? Because me and my friends, we're singing blues music to a mule in Esperanto in our in our school bus, and that's. What do you think of that? Huh? I don't know. All right. Plugs, anyone?
Andrews, you go first. I got to think.
If you are listening to this before Sunday the 25th and you're in New York City, check out my solo show on Sunday. It's called Dummy. It's going to be at Ryan's Daughter. It's about autistic spectrum, learning disabilities, all that good jazz. It's going to be fun, funny.
That sounds awesome. I saw you post about that.
Yeah. Sunday at 7, Ryan's Daughter.
Yeah, I got a bunch of shows in March, but I'll post about them on my Twitter, ACLU Official. Please follow me.
All right.
When our
when
show
does this come out?
We should.
Our show's
out
on
tonight.
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, it's coming tonight? All right.
Overnight.
Saturday, 2 p.m., Creek in the Cave. If you're in New York, I'm doing Late Breakfast with the two Toms, Tommy McNamara and Tom Takar.
Cool. This will come out as you're listening to this. It'll come out Friday, February 23rd. I will be at Secret Loft in Greenwich Village in New York City. It's a great show. You can get tickets online. Look up Secret Loft. Also, me and Raghav will be in Minneapolis, March 23rd, 24th at the Comedy Quarter Underground.
And then Eau Claire at the Plus the day before.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the rest of my shit I'll put on Twitter. All right. Follow us on Twitter and all that bullshit, and have your pets spayed and neutered or something. I don't know.
Please do.
Love you.
See ya.
Yep.